Welcome to Answering AI, where we are asking some tough questions about artificial intelligence and where it fits into our society right now. Today, I want to talk about journalism, one of the loves of my life. I spent 35 years in a TV newsroom, all the way from Texas to Philadelphia to here in the San Francisco Bay Area, where I spent half my career. The fact is, journalism is in trouble. The media companies are a mess. There are a lot of veteran reporters who've been laid off. They're on the sidelines right now. And in the meantime, along comes AI, and every sector of the economy is trying to figure out how to use AI, and that includes journalism. Joining us now is a veteran journalist and scholar. She is a professor at San Francisco State University, used to work at the AP and other news agencies, and actually now she spends a lot of time going around the country talking to journalists, going inside newsrooms, trying to talk to them about how to incorporate AI into their news coverage. And Yumi Wilson, that cannot be an easy task because as a journalist, you're trained to be skeptical.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on your show. I'm so excited to be talking today about AI and journalism. And the question that you ask about newsrooms, the fact is that I've gone to several news conferences, for example, the Online News Association, where, I think the discussion back in 2024 was more from a theoretical perspective, but I think now we are in 2026 and we can clearly see that it's not theoretical anymore. That newsrooms at the company level are using AI for things, everything from transcription to summarizing reports that were once done all by humans. Mm-hmm. So, I don't think it's as simple as saying, hey, here's how to use these tools, and I used to think that it was just that simple. Because when we look at social media and when we look at other technologies that have come along and that we have now kind of incorporated into the journalism space, we can see many of those tools as, okay, how do they help me do my job? The question, and I think the problem is, there's a lot of people, for good reason, who wonder, is this technology here not just to do my job, but to replace me?
Yeah, so you're starting with people who already have a chip on their shoulder. They're already worried about their jobs. Then they're wondering, it's hard enough for a human to tell the truth. Can a robot do it? But just to parse this a little bit, what I heard you say is that, it's good for transcription. It's probably good for research. I'm not hearing you say that it's going to go to a scene and be lied to by politicians on each side and try to discern what is the truth and, produce something on a deadline that, what generally 95% of what a reporter does.
Yeah. So when you think of the part that I think is going to be human for hopefully forever, is the part where humans, journalists, go out to the scene, city council meetings, the courtroom, traffic accidents, places where I think machines and machine learning and all of the power of LLMs combined just don't do what an individual can do, which is to go out there and talk to real people and ask them today, what's going on for you? How are you feeling? What has this meant for you? That's not in any LLM. And that's where I believe there is optimism when I think about journalism and myself as an educator, or I think about when I talk to students, I go, okay, yes, there's a lot to learn. And yes, you can do this. But I do think it is the knowledge of the AI tools, at the very minimum, that everyone who's in the industry of communication will now have to understand.
And just to pause and make sure our viewers and listeners understand, I am always going to stop to make sure we identify any sort of new terms and define them. But so LLMs, we're talking about large language models, and by that we mean the ChatGPTs and the Geminis, the ones we're all sort of becoming more accustomed to using perhaps in our personal lives and some professions, so the ones that can answer some serious questions that can help you organize your life. But what you're saying is, maybe we're not quite there, or maybe we'll never be there to have them actually report.
Yeah, no, I will talk about the phase of artificial intelligence that we're in, and I think that's important to understand too. Currently, we are in a thing called ANI, artificial narrow intelligence. So a lot of the knowledge comes from the way that the model was trained. So all the data, however it got there, and obviously the information that they're able to gather in real time every single day from the contents being shared in the internet. But many people believe we're moving very quickly, some say a matter of years, toward AGI, artificial general intelligence. Now, at this point, the models might be able to go beyond the answers they were given to produce solutions that might move the needle when it comes to questions that we as humans have not been able to solve. There's a great documentary called Thinking Game. I believe his name is Demis Habib. I may be pronouncing it wrong and I apologize, but this documentary is mind-blowing. And I have told everyone to go see it. It's called Thinking Game. Demis, who now I believe is part of the team that works for DeepMind, which is run by Google, started training the models that he was using on video games and all these different games. And we go back to the days where the machine beat the chess player. Remember back? So it really was like this. The documentary kind of goes through a progression of, okay, you can feed an LLM, you can feed the machine like all of this information that you currently have, but the reality is, can this machine or can this the center come up with its own answers to solve problems like climate change, like disease, cancer? That's what a lot of people are now researching and working on all over the world.
So let's pull it back here, and as it relates to journalism, I think what I hear you saying is, all right, so right now, the models are using whatever training they've had, and also they're scraping the internet. They may be scraping legitimate websites and news sites, and also Reddit, which is a sort of bulletin board where a lot of chatter happens that may or may not be based on the truth. So they're using existing knowledge. You're saying eventually, they'll have enough knowledge of their own.
Absolutely.
By virtue of
start thinking. It's the whole idea. That's why I think the document. So the thinking game. It's what if the machine can get to a point where it's thinking and not necessarily just doing a directive, doing what you want it to do. So when we talk about the hallucinations, when we talk about the bias, when we talk about the inability to remember, your basic command, if you've given it content, there are so many things. And for example, you said the AI might pull from Reddit or other things that are not as credible. All of those things are improving. For example, last point, I was in a webinar this morning, and it was run by PR Newswire. And there, they were talking about how LLMs are now pulling content, but they're also ranking content. LLMs are discerning whether there's a quality story versus something that may be questionable. And they're using a lot of the techniques that journalists would use. Does it have sources? So a lot is changing. So even if we can say, well, it's not very good right now, and you've got to have human oversight, and you've got to do all these things, true. How is that going to look in 2030?
Right, or 2027. I mean, it is fascinating to see. Where are we with AI right now? Are newsrooms using it to a great degree, more than we would think? They're not using it for writing, right?
So really, ethically speaking, and basically also, there are AI verification tools that are coming out quite strong. One in particular is called Pangram Labs. And I just interviewed the CEO, the co-founder of that company, and also just been playing around with this tool for a bit now. And it's just quite interesting how there are a number of people who are checking to see if content is 100% created by AI. It is not favored, it is not okay, it is not appealing. And really what they're starting to talk about is this thing called homogenization of our voices. Because the thing is, it's kind of easy over time to start to see the patterns.
That's right.
And then there's no longer that authentic or unique voice that humans bring.
They call it slop. It all looks the same. So to that degree, newsrooms is still against the ethics of a newsroom to use
No, I
AI.
will say though, I haven't seen data to say they know, whether any newsroom uses it. I think that really the idea is, and if I were teaching it in a classroom or teaching it in a session, I would say use AI from anything from, search engine optimized or Google engine I mean, whatever it is that you're trying to optimize, AI tools can help. What about brainstorming? Absolutely. If you're thinking about patterns and trends, run a search that you would run in Google, right? That's where we often have gone. We used to rely on Wikipedia, and remember back in the day, don't use Wikipedia, but everyone was looking at Wikipedia as a starting point. So really, I think that AI can be very helpful in numerous ways to help you brainstorm, visualize, contextualize a story. I think really where your own strength needs to come out in 2026 is how you communicate the story, how you write the story, how you write with your own voice and your own words so you don't sound like everyone else. Yet, at the same time, using a tool like Grammarly or any tool that's going to help you, clarify, simplify a sentence. So I think that there are ways that AI tools can help. I think the problem and the challenge is how can you maintain your voice? And I think you can do that by once again, it helps you along your journey, but at the minute that you're ready to write, that every word is your own. And again, then using those tools to maybe do some fact checking or Grammarly checks or all of those type of checks. Good. I would prefer it, right? Move the comma there, right?
Right.
And that's where we are today.
Good. And I recognize it could change. And I want to be open-minded about it. But the LLMs are not quite there. For example, in my experience with tinkering with them, they can't quite unbury the lead. If you sort of gave it a whole bunch of facts, it couldn't quite tell you what the one part of it that we as journalists are trained to identify and bring to the top and make the headline out of.
I want to just throw in something there because I was doing a Fulbright in Laos, as you probably remember, in November of 2024, and I did a test, and I asked both Gemini and Chat to write a Wall Street Journal method feature based on the facts I give it. Both of those tools understood the Wall Street Journal method. So by prompting in the terminology used in your field, you're able to extract exactly what you want. So when I first started using these tools, you're right, they could not write a news story. They didn't have enough, training on it.
Right. They have gotten better.
Now I can, if I write in, give me an inverted pyramid and a summary news lead, or give me an anecdotal lead. They've been trained on those terms because of usage, right? When they first started, they didn't have as many users. Right. Now, many millions and millions of people are sharing their knowledge, and that knowledge is translated into them being able to discern from a field perspective. Like I want a 2-column TV news package that is 4 minutes long, and I want you to separate or suggest what kind of B-roll I should have. Then I want you to take the transcription of my interviews that I've done, 10 of them, and I want you to input where you think those sound bites or actualities should go. If you give it enough instruction because of your expertise, it will be able to do it.
That's crazy. That's the entire job. Well, that's the job of writing, I suppose. There's still the gathering of news, but yeah, pretty impressive. And to your point, I've tried it again in recent times, and it's getting better at pulling out a lead, and it's still wordy. It's still a little much, but what I know spend a lot of time with is teaching guardrails, right? So tell it what you want from it.
Right. And the good news is if you have an expertise, like you're imagining, the thing is doctors, medical experts, scientists, coders themselves, people who know code routinely use AI to improve their outcomes and their output. Right. So really what we've moved into is experts are not turning away from AI tools. Experts are finding ways to enhance their knowledge base and to take it to another level. And And I guess this is the optimist part in me, is what if we, as journalists, we know what a good news story is. We know what a good lead is. What if we can train our use, so when we're using these tools, so that it does get to a point where it is reflecting how we would write, a powerful lead.
As a reporter, it was often the case, right, that we would get assigned a story and we're sent out the door, and then you get to the scene and it's not what we thought it was. In fact, it's the opposite of what we thought it was. Right there had to be some critical thinking. There had to be some, purposeful behavior to just sort of push everything aside and just be open to whatever we're seeing and feeling and hearing and smelling, and try and understand what the truth is. And as I mentioned earlier, and I will mention again, there are a lot of people who are lying liars and will lie to reporters, right? So, when I think about a robot being able to do any of that stuff, I mean, the conversations I had with my editor, wait, this is the opposite of what we thought it was, but it's still a good story because X, Y, or Z, because it's the opposite. Those kind of critical conversations, I know I'm just so skeptical as to whether a robot could do that, and I bring that up because I think when I speak with folks in the AI industry, they are so determined that it will be AI generated journalism, and it just it doesn't compute for me yet.
Yeah, most recently, I've been reading a lot about the Washington Post, which laid off 30% of its staff, including the entire sports department. And while there's no causal, link in this stories that I've read, and one can only, we would have to look at all the reasons why that's happening. I had an interview with someone else in publishing, and they were saying things that can be automated, meaning things like weather reports, traffic summaries, stock earnings. Many newsrooms and news companies are already using automation tools to produce that content. And that started for some companies more than 5 years ago. So the question is, when you think about something like sports, something that, here in the US at least, journalism, when you think about sports, it's big. You've got personalities, you've got the analysts, you've got commentators, you've got, play-by-play, So to me, it's scary when one of the longest running newspapers, part of a Pulitzer Prize winning legacy with the Grahams, now owned by Jeff Bezos of Amazon, when you think about them making a decision to end an entire department, I'm wondering what is going on. Like, is it that you're not going to have sports scores and all those things? Or, and we'll have to see, right? I haven't done the follow-up yet.
I mean, are they approaching it as a business? And journalism has always been interesting in that way, right? Where, sometimes it doesn't quite add up, but it's a public service, it's important, which is why sometimes when very rich people, buy a newsroom, it doesn't add up on the ledger, but they feel a sense of civic duty. They're helping out democracy. And so that's another reason why this is so very disappointing to hear what the Washington Post is doing. But I say that because I don't know whether it is just, they looked at the bottom line and they took some lines off of their bottom line, as opposed to making a decision about whether the journalism was good or bad, or, whether AI needs to move in. I think a lot of that's still unclear.
Yeah, that part is unclear, but what is clear? I'm working on this book about journalistic thinking and in the age of AI, and a section that I'm working on has to do with what's called the zero-click newsroom. And the idea is that because of AI summaries, now that you find them on Google and elsewhere, these summaries are replacing the behavior of many users. For example, if I'm looking for, maybe I heard about an earthquake earlier today, so I type that into like a Google search. typically what would come up before AI summaries was, a long list of stories, often, news stories. And so people would click on that. And that click would mean traffic driven to that news site. And that's how they were making their money,
Right.
in the last 10 years or so. What's happened is because of AI summaries, the research shows that fewer people are taking the action and clicking on these news sites. So many news sites have suffered. They have lost traffic to their sites. That's a for-profit question, right? That's when you are relying
Yeah.
on money. One way you can say that is I've got all this traffic coming to my site, and now those numbers have dropped.
It's tough. I mean, I think it took them forever to just even get to a place where they could make money in this
Exactly.
strange
After
conundrum.
Craigslist and,
Right. I mean,
the
they used
internet
to
and
have
social media.
right. They used to have classified ads and made a ton of
Right.
money off that, but they did not pivot well. I mean, I think that's pretty well documented. And, our bosses were struggling to just, keep our viewers, keep advertising rates at the place where they were. And I think they're still trying to resuscitate that model, but then that comes along and it changes everything. It's like they move the furniture and now we got to figure out
Yes.
another way. At
That's a
the
great way
same
to say
time that people are trying to get more news, they're trying to figure out what's true. They just
Right.
don't want to pay for it, though. No one has any appetite for paying for it. They're not going to go beyond the paywall, most people.
Well, here's the
So,
interesting thing. I interviewed a publisher based in Denmark for a company called Zetland. It's been around for 10 years. It started in 2016. They are making money. Their subscribers, the subscribership is growing. And the age of 45, I think it was more than 50%, I can't remember the stat, but a number of their subscribers who are willing to pay are in their 20s and 30s.
that's great. I mean, that's hopeful.
Right? That's what I said to him at the end of the interview. I
Yeah.
said, I'm hopeful. So I don't think we can count ourselves out as journalists and as newsrooms that believe in local news and community journalism that needs to be there, and even the larger publications that know that what we do, I mean, what we ultimately do, if you take away everything else that can be automated, at the end of the day, what we do is we try to bring the facts to the people. Yes, there are tools that seem to be able to do things without us, but I truly believe we are not only, it's not that we're in charge, but we're responsible for gently guiding tools to be as compassionate and as human as we are, even as it tries to solve important problems in our world.
Thank you. And I know, I mean, the pursuit of truth is important. I know you're out there teaching journalists, and leave us with this thought. What are you hearing back from them?
Well, I think students at SF State, where I teach, are still like on the bubble. Some, use AI. Some don't talk about it. Some say they don't. Some don't. And I think what's interesting is when I was traveling, when I was in Asia, it's not a question. Everyone is using it. Every faculty member is using it. So therefore, the discussions we could have or we're having were like, hey, we noticed that Gemini was using $10 academic words for a news story, and we all now know that that's not good. And we're now able to point that out, train the model, so on and so forth. Whereas in my classrooms, I think there's a lot of uncertainty. And I would say, what if we, as students and beyond, anyone trying to learn and grow in this world, decided a safe way to learn about these tools? And then when we see the problems, we call it out and we're part of the conversation. I think you and I talked about this. We need to be aware of what's going on.
Well,
It's
thank you for
here.
doing
Yeah,
your
yeah.
part in bringing that awareness to our listeners here. And
Welcome.
you've been listening to Answering AI. Thanks for tuning in, and stay tuned for the next one.